So, about 2 centuries after Augustus had instated the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, Rome's empire actually began to weaken. Um, so, around this time, Marcus Aurelius became emperor, and the Roman army found it increasingly difficult to keep order on the frontiers and even within the empire. And it might have been because the empire became so large. Um, Many challenged Roman power at this time and actually succeeded in defeating the Roman military in certain areas of the Roman Empire. And when Marcus Aurelius' son Commodus was assassinated in 192 CE, that officially brought the end to the rule of the Antonine family. And the economy was really suffering during this time, and the official religion was starting to lose out to Christianity. So Christianity was really coming into its own at this time. And this era can be thought of as kind of the transition from Rome at its height into the classical Middle Ages, which were typically very Christian. So the Severans, we'll talk about them. They're the next ruling family of Rome. So civil unrest followed Commodus's death, and then an African-born general named Septimus Severus became emperor, and his dynasty ruled the empire for almost half a century. So he declared himself the son of Marcus Aurelius, which he definitely probably wasn't. But he did this to solidify his place as the successor of Marcus Aurelius. So this is a painted portrait of Septimus Severus and his family from Egypt. Like I said, I think he was from Africa. So it's tempera on wood. And so this is the only surviving painted portrait of Severus, or any Roman emperor, actually. It was discovered in Egypt. It was painted in the medium of tempera paint, which is basically egg yolk that is mixed with a pigment powder to create a medium. And it was done on wood. So let's see. So the portrait is done in this format that is circular. It's called tondo, Tondo. And it shows Severus with his wife and his 2 sons, Caracalla and Geta. And Severus has gray hair, which suggests a lot of his painted sculptures probably had gray hair as well to show his advanced age. And the interesting thing about this portrait is Geta's face has been erased. So when Caracalla succeeded his father, he had his younger brother killed, and I believe his wife too, and maybe even his father-in-law, to kind of solidify his place on the throne. And he had his brother's Geta's face erased from history. And this has been done a lot of times before, including in ancient Egypt, but Rome was really practiced at it, and it was called damnatio memoriae. Damnatio memoriae is the term for it that the Romans used. So we're going to move on to Caracalla, who was the son of Septimus. So he's still a Severan, obviously. But this is the bust of Caracalla from 211 to 217. It's made out of marble. And it shows him nude, except for a mantle over one shoulder and a baldric across his chest. As you can see. His hair is much shorter, still curly, initiating kind of a new fashion in the male haircut, basically. It's a little bit shorter and curly, and he does wear a beard. And this is popular during the 3rd century. And if you look at his expression, it's very intense. He kind of has a V-shaped brow, and his head turns over his shoulder. He appears to be sensing danger from behind, potentially, but many historians think the sculptor was trying to show a sense of strength and energy. But it turns out Caracalla did need to be fearful because he was assassinated 6 years into his rule. So this is a very turbulent time during the 3rd century, and it became even more commonplace during this time for emperors to be assassinated and then replaced and assassinated again. So talking about that Severan family, they came from Africa, as I mentioned earlier, and their hometown was Leptis Magna, and that's a coastal location on the coast of Libya, in the Mediterranean. And the Severans actually constructed a harbor there, a new basilica, and a new arch. And so we'll kind of take a look at the relief from the attic of the Arch of Septimus Severus here from Lepsis Magna in Libya. It's a chariot possession of Septimus Severus, and this arch had reliefs on all four sides of the attic, and this relief depicts the chariot possession of the emperor and his two sons after their homecoming in 203. And unlike other previous Roman reliefs, there's no motion in this piece. Everybody seems pretty still, even though it's a chariot progression or procession. The emperor and his son are facing the viewers. I believe they might be here. And the figures in the second row have no connection with the ground. So there's some here in the second row behind the first row, and they kind of are floating there. And the sculptor actually elevated them so we can see them more clearly. Both the frontality and the floating figures were new to official Roman art. We've seen this kind of art in the art of private art in free slave tombs, potentially for the lower classes, but not in empirical art to this point in time anyway. So these non-classical elements are now being used by emperor sculptors, actually, and they start to replace that classical style that the Romans adopted from Greece, and with this more kind of primitive, more primitive style. And the historians think the use of this aesthetic in Roman art is kind of a byproduct of the social, political, and economical upheaval that was happening during this time in Rome, during the late antiquity period, which this is actually called the late antique style. So, okay, we're going to move on. Oops. So the Severans also built baths in Rome, Italy, and the baths of Caracalla is what they were called. And Augustus was definitely one of the first to build public baths, and they did this to win public favor. A lot of the time the emperors would build baths. And the baths of Caracalla had brick-faced concrete walls, and they were 140 feet high in some places and covered by enormous concrete vaults. This temple is symmetrical along a central axis, so if we divide it in half, it's symmetrical. And Romans typically would take plunges in different temperatures of baths, which the symmetrical plan kind of helped facilitate that. They have the pools here, one, the natatio, which is, I believe, the swimming pool. Number 2 is the frigidarium. And then number 3 is tepidarium, and then caldarium is number 4. And then the palestra are here. So I'm guessing it gets, warmer and warmer the closer you get to the round caldarium. And the caldarium was a huge circular chamber with a concrete drum, even taller than the pantheons, and a dome almost as large as the pantheons above it. And this building, was a 50-acre bathing complex that included landscape gardens, lecture halls, libraries, colonnaded exercise courts, which I believe that's what these are, the exercise courts. And they say that 1,600 bathers could use this place at one time, and aqueducts shipped the water to it, and then there was a large furnace that heated the air and the floors and the walls, because those were hollow. And the Romans are actually known for their kind of advanced use of central heating, and they have a lot of technology going into central heating practices for their different buildings that they built. So that central heating means that the floors were heated, the certain parts of the water were heated, that kind of thing. And the baths of Caracalla also had a clerestory, marble-faced walls, marble statuary, mosaic floors, in black and white and polychrome colors. And one of the statues on display was the 10-foot-tall marble version of the Lysippos' Heracles. And we actually went over that in the Greek chapter, but it's basically the wary Heracles leaning on his club. So that kind of might give you a little bit of a feel for the appearance of it. And also we can take a look at this and look at the marble and some of the flooring and stuff, because this was originally the frigidarium of the baths of Diocletian in Rome, Italy. It was remodeled, so it's not completely accurate, but it gives us a little bit of the idea of what it might have sort of looked like inside of the baths of Caracalla in Rome, Italy. So we'll talk about the soldier emperors a little bit here. So during this turbulent period, emperors were named and then almost immediately killed and then replaced, and civil war was continuous during this time. And the only significant building project was when Aurelian built a defensive wall around the perimeter of Rome, which really illustrates how Rome's power was waning. And so this is a portrait bust of Trajan Decius, 249 to 251 CE, marble. Many portraits during this turbulent time no longer survive due to the fact that the portraits were destroyed once the emperor was replaced, which was happening a lot during this time. And as you know, the emperors were being replaced a lot, obviously, during this time. And the emperor portraits that do exist from this time are very moving, though. And there are not very many, like I said, but there are some. And here's a bust of the soldier emperor named Trajan Decius, who was well known for his persecution of Christians, so don't feel too sorry for this guy. His portrait is done in the veristic style, but it also shows a lot of emotion in his face. You know, he is this old man that appears insecure in his position of power, and no one can blame him because this time period in Roman history was very dangerous for rulers because oftentimes they were murdered and then replaced. So it just shows a troubled, tired-looking older man here. We may actually continue on. Well, actually, we could keep going. Okay, we'll look at this heroic portrait of Trebonianus. He was Trajan Decius's successor, and this bronze statue of him is huge, and his body is quite broad, and his head is really small compared to his body. And his body is a wrestler's body. It does not resemble that perfect Greek athlete, the youthful body that was found in art that was influenced by Greece. And it shows that during this time period, brute strength was favored over the Greek ideal of the perfectly proportioned youthful body. So really, during this time period, brute strength was, favored. So this is the battle of the Romans and the barbarians. During the 3rd century, even the Roman emperors were opting for burials, so that has changed. They're no longer being cremated, they're being buried, and so sarcophagi are very popular. And this sarcophagus is very large, and it was discovered in 1621, and it shows a tangle of human bodies that is definitely a clear rejection of the classical style from Greece. You can see the central horseman is, he's kind of sticking out. He's pretty prominent. He does not wear a helmet. He holds out an empty hand. He has no weapon in his hand, and is confident that he doesn't think he needs one. He thinks that he's going to win this fight, and it's thought to be one of Trajan Decius's sons. And on his forehead, the sculptor carved the emblem of Mithras, the Persian god of light, truth, and victory over death. So it's hard to see, but he does have something carved there. So this is definitely a departure from the classical style as well. And there's a lot of kind of movement and writhing bodies just piled up on top of each other, and there's no accurate representation of space. And we will move forward in the next video.